I should have shut up when I had the chance, but instead I leaned across the table, wine glass tipping dangerously in my hand, and said it loud enough for the whole damn restaurant to hear. "You're not man enough to handle a woman like me." Evan didn't say a word right away. He just sat there, blinking like he wasn't sure if he'd heard me right, and the silence that followed was so thick it felt like a noose tightening around my neck. I laughed it off because that's what I always did when I said something too sharp, too cruel. I laughed and shrugged and acted like it didn't mean anything. But even before the smile fully stretched across my face, I knew something between us had cracked wide open, something that wouldn't ever go back to the way it was. We had been together for almost 5 years, and if you had asked me the week before, I would have said we were solid, the real thing, the kind of relationship that other people envied but didn't understand. Evan was the kind of man who moved slowly through the world, thinking twice before he spoke, measuring his steps, cautious in a way that used to make me feel safe. I was the opposite. All fire and noise, the kind of woman who filled a room and didn't leave space for anyone else's second thoughts. Maybe that's why it worked in the beginning, because his quiet steadiness made me feel like I wasn't going to spin off the planet, and my chaos gave him permission to live a little. But over time, what had once felt like balance started to feel like suffocation, and the more I pulled at the seams, the more tightly he clung to the life we had built. I guess if I'm being honest, there were signs long before that night. Little resentments piling up like dirty dishes we both pretended not to notice. The way he'd sigh when I booked another last-minute trip without asking if he could take the time off work. The way I'd roll my eyes when he turned down an invite to a party because he didn't feel like being around a bunch of people. I wanted more. More passion, more adventure, more fire. I wanted him to grab me by the waist when I walked through the door, to argue with me, to fight for me. Instead, he just sat there, day after day, loving me in that steady, patient way that started to feel more like a slow erasure of everything I used to be. That night wasn't even supposed to be special. It was a random Wednesday, some new place downtown he had made reservations at because he said we needed us time, like putting it on a calendar would somehow fix whatever was wrong. I showed up late because I was stuck in a meeting that ran over, my head buzzing with numbers and deadlines and the sharp thrill of closing another deal at work. I barely glanced at him when I slid into the booth, too busy texting my assistant about some stupid email. When I finally looked up, he was just sitting there, watching me with this tired little smile, like he already knew how the night was going to go. "You're busy," he said, not accusing, just observing, like he always did. "I'm fine," I snapped, shoving my phone into my purse harder than necessary. We ordered wine, we talked about nothing, and somewhere between the second glass and the third, the conversation shifted into dangerous territory. He asked if I was happy, really happy, and instead of telling him the truth that I didn't even know anymore, I laughed and said something sarcastic about how I needed a real man who could keep up with me. And then, because I couldn't stop myself because it was easier to be cruel than honest, I said it. "You're not man enough."
He didn't yell. He didn't argue.
He just stared at me for a moment like he was trying to memorize my face, trying to capture this version of me he didn't recognize. Then he pushed his chair back, stood up so quietly it made my skin crawl, and walked out of the restaurant without a word. I sat there for a minute, blinking at the empty space where he had been, before grabbing my wine glass and draining it like it was going to save me from what I had just done. The server came over, awkwardly pretending not to notice that my date had abandoned me, and I mumbled something about him feeling sick. I paid the bill and walked out into the cold night, hugging my coat tighter around me, my breath puffing into the dark like tiny ghosts. I told myself he just needed time to cool off, that he would come home, and we would have a fight, a real one, the kind of screaming, crying, throwing things fight that we never had, the kind that meant passion was still alive somewhere under all the quiet. But when I got home, the apartment was dark. His shoes were gone from the doorway. His favorite hoodie was missing from the back of the chair where he always left it. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank space like an idiot, waiting for the sound of his keys in the door that never came. And that was the moment I realized I hadn't picked a fight to wake him up. I had thrown a grenade into my own life, and Evan, for once, had chosen to walk away without looking back. When Evan didn't come home that night or the next morning, I didn't panic right away. I told myself he was stubborn, that he just needed time to cool off, but every hour that passed started pulling at me harder, and I could feel the knot in my stomach growing tighter. Still, I refused to call him. I refused to text. I refused to be the one to break first, because somewhere deep inside me, I thought if I acted like it wasn't a big deal, it wouldn't be a big deal. I thought maybe if I stayed strong enough, he would come crawling back. But the truth was, every time my phone buzzed and it wasn't him, the shame burned a little deeper. The next evening, I went to see my friend Serena because I couldn't sit in that silent apartment anymore. The rooms felt too big, the empty spaces too loud. Serena opened the door, still wearing her messy bun and leggings, her face pulling into a worried frown the second she saw mine. She didn't even ask. She just stepped aside to let me in. We sat in her kitchen drinking the cheapest wine she had in the fridge, and I told her everything, or at least my version of everything, and she listened. The way good friends do, nodding at the right parts, frowning when I said Evan walked out, but when I finished, instead of giving me the comfort I was hoping for, she set her glass down and said something that made my stomach turn. You know, Cam, sometimes you push too hard just to see if someone will stay, and then when they finally leave, you act surprised. I stared at her, feeling a flush crawl up my neck, because it wasn't a comforting lie. It was a truth I didn't want to look at too closely. I opened my mouth to argue, to say she didn't understand, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead I said, "He's being dramatic, it's just a fight." And Serena just gave me a long look, the kind that made me want to throw my wine glass at the wall and scream. Later that night, after I left her place, I sat in my car outside Evan's building for almost an hour. The lights were off in his apartment window, and I told myself he was probably staying at a friend's house, or maybe at some hotel burning a hole in his savings just to prove a point. I thought about texting him again, something short, something casual like, "You good?" But the longer I stared at the screen, the heavier my hand felt. Eventually, I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and drove home. The third day without him, I made a stupid mistake. I went to his work, not in some dramatic storming in kind of way, but just to see if he was there, to remind myself he still existed in the world and hadn't just disappeared completely. I knew his schedule. I knew when his lunch break usually was, so I parked across the street like some idiot stalker and watched the door. When he finally came out, he was alone, walking with that same careful pace he always had, but he looked different somehow. Heavier, like something inside him had cracked and was leaking out all over the sidewalk. He didn't see me, which was probably for the best, because I didn't know what I would have done if he had. That night, my sister called. I didn't want to answer because I knew what she would say, but I picked up anyway because part of me needed someone to tell me I was still worth something. She asked how I was, and I said fine, because that's what you say even when everything is falling apart. And when I finally told her about the fight, about the words I had thrown at Evan like knives, she was silent for a long moment before saying, "Camille, you can't expect a man to stay where he's constantly made to feel small." I didn't mean it. I snapped, hating the way my voice cracked a little. It was just a joke. "Yeah, but did it sound like a joke to him?" she asked quietly, and I didn't have an answer for that because if I was honest, even in the moment, part of me had meant every word, not because Evan wasn't enough, but because I needed him to fight for me, and when he didn't, it felt like he was proving me right. By the end of the week, the reality started sinking in. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't shown up at the door with flowers and that tired, forgiving smile I used to take for granted, and for the first time, I realized he might actually be done, not just mad, not just hurt, but done. Like the version of him that had been willing to stay through my tantrums and cold shoulders had finally reached the edge of whatever line he had drawn in the sand long before I noticed it. I thought about going to him, thought about standing outside his door like some sad apology, but every time I pictured it, I saw his face the night I said those words, how still he had been, how hollow his eyes looked when he realized I wasn't joking, and I knew that no amount of sorry would erase the way I made him feel in that moment. Instead, I stayed in my apartment, pacing the same 3 rooms, checking my phone like an addict, playing through every conversation we had ever had, trying to find the moment it had all started to slip away. I remembered how he used to leave little notes for me to find, scribbled on receipts and post-its, stupid things like, "Don't forget you're amazing," or "Tonight, pizza and a movie," and how I used to roll my eyes and call him cheesy. Now I would have given anything to find one of those dumb notes tucked into the mirror or slipped into my bag. I didn't sleep much that week, Every creak in the building, every buzz of my phone made me sit up straight, heart hammering, hoping it would be him, but it never was. My friend stopped texting, probably tired of trying to convince me to move on or apologize, and eventually, it was just me and the cold silence I had built for myself. When Friday night came and went with no word, I knew the damage wasn't something that could be undone with a conversation or a bouquet of flowers. I had broken something in Evan that was never going to heal right. Even if he did come back, it wouldn't be the same, and for the first time, I had to sit with the idea that maybe I didn't deserve him to come back at all. I didn't plan on seeing him again so soon, but 2 weeks after that night, we ran into each other at a coffee shop neither of us had ever really liked, but somehow both ended up at. I was standing in line pretending to scroll through my phone when I looked up and there he was. Same worn jacket, same serious face, but there was something different, something colder around the edges that hadn't been there before. We locked eyes for a second, and I opened my mouth, not even sure what I was going to say. But Evan just gave a small nod, polite like I was a stranger he barely recognized, and turned away to order his coffee. I stood there frozen, feeling the sting in my chest grow sharper with every second he spent not looking at me. I thought maybe he would say something, anything, but he paid, took his drink, and walked right past me without a word. It hit harder than anything he could have said. I followed him out without even thinking, catching him just as he was about to cross the street. "Evan," I called out, my voice too loud in the cool morning air. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Can we talk?" He stood there for a second before turning, his expression unreadable. "About what, Camille?" "I don't know about everything," I said, taking a step closer. I didn't mean what I said. He let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh and shook his head. "You meant it enough to say it." "It was a stupid joke, Evan. I was drunk and pissed off and—" He cut me off, his voice low but steady. "You don't say something like that unless part of you believes it." I didn't know what to say to that because the truth was, part of me had believed it in that moment, or at least wanted it to hurt him enough to wake him up, but standing there now, looking at him, all I felt was the heavy weight of regret. I needed you to show me that you cared," I said, the words tumbling out too fast. "I needed to feel like you gave a damn." He stared at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "And you thought tearing me down would do that?" I swallowed hard, trying to hold his gaze, trying to keep standing even as everything inside me crumbled. "I didn't know how else to get your attention." "That's the thing, Cam," he said, his voice flat. "You always needed a fight to feel something, and I was never going to be enough of a war for you." For a second, all I could do was stand there, breathing hard, feeling the eyes of strangers brush over us as they passed. I hated how calm he was, how steady, like he had already made peace with whatever decision he had come to. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him angry, but instead I just said, "Are you really giving up on us?" "I'm not giving up," he said. "I'm just done trying to prove to you that I'm worth something." I flinched like he had slapped me, and he must have seen it because he softened just a fraction, enough to make it worse. "I loved you," he said simply. "I still do. But I'm not going to spend my life trying to convince you to love me back the way I deserve." I watched him walk away then, crossing the street without looking back, and I wanted to run after him, to grab his arm and beg him to stay, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there until he disappeared around the corner, clutching my coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. The next few days were a blur of missed calls and unanswered texts, not from Evan, but from friends and family who had heard through one way or another that we were taking a break. No one said the word breakup yet, not even me. Like, if we didn't say it out loud, it wouldn't be real. I kept waiting for some grand gesture, for him to show up at my door, for some dramatic scene where we would fight and cry and somehow find our way back to each other. But it never happened, and the silence between us kept growing until it felt like it was pressing down on my chest. One night, after too many glasses of wine, I called him. The phone rang and rang before it finally went to voicemail. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding, and before I could stop myself, I left a message. "Evan, I miss you," I said, my voice cracking. "I was stupid, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I just didn't know how to say what I was feeling. I still don't, I guess, but please, can we just talk, even if it's just to say goodbye?" I hung up before I could say anything else, before I could start crying and humiliate myself even more, and then I waited, my phone clutched in my hand like it was some kind of lifeline, but he didn't call back that night, or the next day, or the day after that. Instead, 3 days later, I got a text from him, short and clinical, like we were nothing more than acquaintances who shared a Netflix password once. "I'll come by on Saturday to get my things. Please don't be there." I read it over and over, trying to make it mean something different, but the words stayed the same, heavy and sharp and final. I wanted to reply, to say no, to say please, but I didn't because deep down, I knew I had already said too much. Saturday morning, I packed a bag and left before Evan could arrive. I couldn't stand the thought of being there, sitting in the living room like some kind of desperate wreck while he walked through what used to be our life together, picking up pieces like he was cleaning up after a party he didn't even enjoy. I drove to a small diner on the edge of town where no one knew me and ordered coffee I didn't drink. I sat by the window staring at my phone, flipping it over in my hands, half hoping he would text and say he changed his mind, that he didn't want to go through with it. But deep down, I knew Evan wasn't the type to make threats he wouldn't carry out. If he said he was coming to get his things, then that was exactly what he would do. Around noon, Serena called, asking if I was okay. I almost told her to mind her own business, but I didn't have the energy to fight anyone else. I told her I was fine, just needed some space. And she said okay in that voice that meant she didn't believe a word of it but wasn't going to push. When I finally got the nerve to drive back to the apartment around 3, I sat in the parking lot for a long time before going in. There was no sign of Evan's car, and when I opened the door, it felt like walking into a stranger's home. Half the closet was empty, his favorite chair was gone from the corner. The little stack of books he always kept by the bed was missing. It wasn't like he had taken everything, but it was enough that the absence hit me in the face the second I stepped inside. I wandered from room to room like I was seeing it for the first time, running my hand over the back of the couch, pulling open drawers just to stare at the empty spaces inside. He hadn't left a note, hadn't sent a text to say he was done, or to wish me luck, or to tell me to take care. It was just silence, heavy and absolute. I sank down onto the floor in the bedroom, leaning back against the door, and stared at the ceiling. I wanted to cry, wanted to scream, wanted to punch a hole in the wall. But all I could do was sit there feeling like a kid who just realized they had lost a game they didn't even know they were playing. For the next few days, I tried to pretend it wasn't happening. I went to work, smiled at coworkers, answered emails, sat through meetings, but the second I got home, it was like the walls closed in around me. There were reminders everywhere. The coffee mug he always used pushed to the back of the cabinet, the extra set of keys still hanging by the door, the worn spot on the couch where he always sat. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, he was everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was Serena who suggested I go out just for a night, just to remember there was still life outside of Evan. She dragged me to some bar downtown filled with people too young and too loud, and even though I didn't want to be there, I let her buy me a drink and tried to look like I wasn't falling apart inside. Somewhere between the second and third drink, some guy started talking to me. He was tall and confident in a way that felt fake but comforting at the same time. I didn't catch his name. Didn't really care. He laughed too loudly at his own jokes and touched my arm a little too much, but I let him because for a few minutes it felt good to have someone look at me like I mattered. When Serena went to the bathroom, he leaned in closer, his breath warm against my ear, and said, "You look like you need someone to make you forget whatever's eating you up." It should have made me uncomfortable, should have made me push him away, but instead I smiled and tilted my head, letting him think whatever he wanted to think. I wasn't going to sleep with him. I wasn't even going to give him my number, but I wanted Evan to see me. I wanted him to know that he wasn't the only one who could walk away without looking back. So when I saw him standing across the bar, his face pale and tight with something I couldn't name, I didn't pull away from the guy's hand on my arm. I don't know how long Evan had been standing there, but when our eyes met, he didn't look away, didn't storm over, didn't cause a scene. He just stared at me for a long moment before turning on his heel and walking out the door. I shoved the guy's hand off me so fast he didn't even have time to react and ran after Evan, pushing through the crowd, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst through my ribs. "Evan, wait," I called as I burst out onto the street, but he didn't slow down. He kept walking, shoulders stiff, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. I caught up to him halfway down the block and grabbed his arm, forcing him to stop. He turned to me, his face unreadable, his voice low, and even when he spoke, "What do you want, Camille?" I wasn't. I started, but he cut me off. You weren't what? Flirting? Moving on? Proving something? I shook my head, reaching for him. But he stepped back like the very thought of touching me disgusted him. I didn't mean for you to see that, I said, hating how desperate I sounded. It's not about me seeing it, he said, his voice still calm but cutting. It's about who you are when you think no one's watching. That's not fair, I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. You left, Evan. What was I supposed to do? Sit around and wait for you to come back? He gave a small, humorless laugh and shook his head. I didn't leave because I didn't love you, Camille. I left because you don't know what to do with someone who stays. We stood there for a long moment, the streetlight flickering overhead, cars passing by, people laughing in the distance, but in that moment, it was just the two of us, two people who had loved each other once and didn't know how to anymore. Goodbye, Camille, he said finally, turning away again, and this time, I didn't chase him. The first week after Evan walked away for the last time, I told myself I didn't care. I threw myself into work, stayed late at the office, volunteered for projects I didn't even want, anything to avoid coming home to the empty apartment that smelled like a life that didn't belong to me anymore. When people asked about him, I smiled and said we were figuring things out, pretending like there was still something left to figure out when deep down I knew there wasn't. The truth sat heavy in my chest every night when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I had made the right choice by not running after him, by not falling to my knees and begging him to stay. Serena tried to get me to talk about it, but I kept shutting her down, telling her I was fine, telling her that Evan had made his decision and I respected it, even though every time I said it, it felt like I was ripping my own skin off. Eventually, she stopped asking and started treating me like a fragile object she wasn't sure how to handle. I hated it, but I couldn't blame her because I knew she could see the cracks no matter how much I smiled and joked and pretended. I wasn't fooling anyone, least of all myself. It was a Saturday afternoon when I finally broke, sitting on the floor of our closet, holding one of Evan's old sweatshirts that he must have forgotten or maybe left on purpose. It still smelled like him, like soap and something steady and safe, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not the quiet tears I wiped away before anyone could see, but the ugly, shaking, gut-deep sobs that made my whole body hurt. I cried for every stupid thing I said, for every time I pushed him away when all he wanted was to stay, for every second I spent convincing myself that love had to look like fireworks instead of quiet devotion. When I finally pulled myself together enough to stand, I knew I had to see him one last time, not to beg him to come back. I didn't even believe he would anymore, but because I needed him to hear me say it, not through angry texts or tearful voicemails, but standing in front of him, telling the truth without hiding behind jokes or pride. It took me 2 days to get the courage. 2 days of rehearsing what I would say and trying to convince myself that it wouldn't make a difference if he didn't say anything back. I showed up at his new place without calling, a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town that smelled like new paint and loneliness. He opened the door after the second knock, looking tired but not surprised to see me. He didn't invite me in, just stood there blocking the doorway, waiting for me to explain why I'd come. I'm not here to fight, I said quickly, hating the way my voice shook. I need to tell you something. He didn't say anything, just crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe, giving me the smallest nod to go on. I was wrong, I said, my hands twisting together. I was scared and selfish and stupid, and I hurt you because I didn't know how else to feel important, and instead of loving you the way you deserved, I tore you down. I made you feel small because I didn't know how to handle the fact that you loved me better than I ever knew how to love you back. He didn't move, didn't react, just kept watching me with those careful eyes that had once made me feel so safe. I don't expect you to forgive me, I said, forcing the words out even though they tasted like blood in my mouth. I don't even expect you to say anything, but you deserve to hear it from me. Not from the gossip, not from the silence, from me. I waited, my heart pounding so hard it made my hands shake. Part of me still stupid enough to hope he would step aside and let me in, but after a long moment, he just shook his head slowly. I appreciate you saying it, he said, his voice calm and tired. But it doesn't change anything. I nodded because there was nothing else to do. because the truth was that I hadn't come there to fix things, even if some small part of me still dreamed it could. I had come there to bury the hope properly, so it would stop rotting inside me. "I'm sorry," I said again, softer this time. He gave me a sad kind of smile, the kind that said he wasn't angry anymore, just tired, and then he closed the door, gently, like he didn't want to hurt me even now. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, feeling the finality of it settle into my bones. There was no dramatic goodbye, no grand declarations, just the quiet, irreversible truth that I had destroyed the one good thing in my life because I didn't know how to believe that someone could love me without needing to be tested. When I finally turned and walked away, it wasn't with any kind of dignity or grace. It was just survival, one foot in front of the other, until I made it back to my car and sat there staring at the steering wheel. I didn't cry this time. There was nothing left, just a hollow ache where all the anger and pride and fear had finally burned themselves out. That was the last time I saw Evan. No calls, no texts, no chance encounters at coffee shops. He disappeared from my life the way real endings happen. Not with a bang, but with a door quietly closing. Sometimes late at night, I still reach for my phone, still think about sending a message, something small, something stupid, just to see if he'll answer. But I don't, because I know now that love isn't about who can survive the most wounds. It's about not wounding each other in the first place, and I was too late to learn that lesson with Evan. So instead, I live with the memory of what I destroyed and the understanding that sometimes there are no second chances, no clean slates, just the long, slow work of carrying your mistakes with you, knowing exactly what they cost.